Hello, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Lara. I'm the Community Manager at European Leadership University, or ELU for short. And we are a next generation university focused exclusively on developing talent in tech with a competency-based educational model. Now, at the same time, we work a lot with different partners in the market, different companies, so a lot of interest to bring people together and bring people in conversation with each other. So that's exactly what we're doing today. Now today's webinar is part of a larger series called Building a Data Science Team. This is the second rendition of our series, and it's basically for recruiters, for data professionals with leadership ambitions, to talk about things like what are these skill sets that you need in your team, how to position data science within your organization, or what are different management strategies. And today we'll be talking about the position of data science within the organization, working with other teams with 3 different experts. My colleague Christella will be introducing everyone, but we very much welcome questions from the audience as well. So please, if you do have a question, you can either drop it in the chat or in the Q&A boxes below, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. Thank you again for joining, and I'll pass the floor to you, Christella.
Thank you, Lara, and welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here on this, for us in the Netherlands, rainy day. It's perfect for a webinar. I hope you're well. I'm very curious to see who's here. So if you could put your name and your current job or occupation in the chat, that would be lovely, just so we have an idea of who you are. And indeed, like Lara said, feel free to ask all your questions. So in the past couple of weeks, we've been building up our webinars on what is data science, what does the team look like, how do you assemble the team, management strategies of the team. And today's the next step. We zoom out a little bit. We talk about what is the position of data science within the organization, and how can you, as a data science manager, guarantee success, guarantee impact, create impact with your data science team, and how can you best do that? And to talk about that, we have 3 experts from the field with all their own expertise. We have John Popelaars here, Massimo Belloni, and Julien Reinke. They come from different expertises, from scale up to corporate, to entrepreneurship, to consultancy. So we'll bring a lot of different voices together tonight. They'll introduce themselves a little bit more and tell them who they are. So let's get started. My first question is for all of you, so you can shortly introduce yourself. And then my first question is, what is the biggest lesson you have learned in the past year? Thanks again for being here, and let's start with Julien.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and hi everyone. My name is Julien. I'm working as a manager within Ahold Delhaize, working at Albert Heijn actually. So yeah, I'm working with the bonus card data, one of the most exciting customer data sets of the Netherlands, I could say. Well, maybe it's a big question, but and anyway, I'll try to answer it. My biggest lesson learned. It's maybe not a really new lesson, but something that got confirmed for me over again. And that is the role big tech also plays within data analytics. So at Albert Heijn, we use Databricks with Microsoft Azure, which is really a necessity working with these large amounts of data. Yeah, and therefore it also really enables us to really take huge steps because we don't need to develop everything ourselves. When I started working at bol.com, we were setting up our own Hadoop clusters. Some of you might still be familiar with, which obviously consumed a lot of time. And if you see now the speed we gained just by taking off-the-shelf solutions, I think really accelerated what we wanted to achieve so far.
Great, thank you, and welcome again. What about you, Massimo? Can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what your biggest lesson is?
Yep. I'm Massimo. I'm currently working as a team lead of the data engineering team at Housing Anywhere. As Cristela was saying, we are still a scale up, so we are in total a little bit more than 100 employees in the data team all together. Under different responsibilities, we are pretty much 10 people. In my team, the focus is mixed between data science, so pure data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence as buzzwords, and data engineering, so supporting the business intelligence team, the data analysts for decision making and analyzing the product. My biggest lesson, of course, I agree with Julian, and I want to move a little bit also as a concept in this direction. That oftentimes in data, especially in the data science field, there is kind of a race to do the most complicated things possible, to move the state of the art using complex technologies. But at the very beginning, in the early stages of a team, especially while you still have to prove that there is value in using data, the simplest things are the one that has to be tried first, and are the ones that, especially at the beginning, was the best. So the biggest lesson for a data team in general that still have to prove success, or when you are in the early stages of setting up a data team, is to do the simplest things at the beginning. The simplest thing at the beginning, not trying to put yourself in the race of doing hyper complicated stuff, because the simplest things are the ones that gives the better results. And are the one that you have to use to prove a point as soon as possible, that you can build up the grounding then to build more complicated stuff.
All right, thank you. So create some quick wins in the beginning. Thank you. Last but not least, John, please introduce yourself and tell us your biggest lesson.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, my name is John Poppelaars. I have quite some experience, already 30 years in this area. So I've worked as a consultant, I worked in software, and since a year I'm also an entrepreneur in this area. So I can tap on, let's say, lots of experience. About, let's say, the biggest lesson, well, there's of course lots to learn in 30 years of experience, but I think the biggest lesson of maybe the last year is really be honest about what a client can expect from technology. It was already mentioned by Julian and also by Massimo. A lot of clients that I talk to have really high expectations of what they can solve for technology. And you have to be clear on what they can and can't expect. And I think you need, as a consultant or as an entrepreneur, be very clear about what is necessary, what is required to be successful. And how a technique can, let's say, be supportive in that.
Thank you. I think that's a good one. So clear expectation management, and we're already talking here about the connection, right, between data and the business. So that's very interesting. Just to warm up a bit, I'm curious to hear, in the organizations that you've worked in, did you work mostly with centralized teams? And do you believe in centralized teams, or do you believe more in mixed Scrum teams or having dedicated data science teams within every part of the organization? John, perhaps you can start.
I think it depends on the maturity of an organization. So if it's something very new, and it's not well known within an organization, what you can expect from data science or any other type of technology, it makes sense to have some kind of a central initiative. And that then, as soon as first successes are being achieved, and different parts of the organization start to learn about what they can expect from this type of technology, it makes sense to disperse that team into parts of the organization. It could be that there's a very specific, deep type of knowledge required, and then it makes sense to make a dedicated team within an organizational part. So, for example, if you do video analysis, for example, I know, for example, an example from one of our broadcasting agencies in the Netherlands. There you have very deep knowledge required. You need very deep knowledge to be able to analyze a video, and that doesn't make sense then to have that organizational somewhere central, and then it really makes sense to do it in a separate part of the organization. So that's more general. Maybe Massimo or Julian can, let's say, comment on that, given their experience.
Yeah, I can say something about that, John. Thank you. So actually, we just finished the whole process of centralizing our analytics capabilities. Indeed, because we want to accelerate that even more. So there we are actually in the phase that John just described. So yeah, I fully agree with that. That in the beginning, it really makes sense to do it in that way. And on the other hand, of course, it's always a discussion that the advantage of decentralization is that you are closer to the business. So obviously, you should still try to stay close to the business stakeholders and business owners of your questions. But I also wanted to raise another point to this, and that is that actually I believe that it's not only important that the data people connect with the business, but also if you are really like data driven organization, actually also all the business people should have some data sense. I always say it takes two to tango. So that means like besides the data people being business savvy, the business people should also become data savvy and actually try to apply the insights really in their day-to-day work, and not only like wait for this one big eye-opening insight, but actually apply it every day. They make small decisions, and then this, doing 1% better every day will also add up to a lot of value in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I want to raise a point that neither Julian or John explicitly raised, at least, because it's having a centralized data team or a distributed data team in different teams in the business is a decision that we took more than 1 year ago, when we still were in a smaller scale than now. In the end, we decided to go for a centralized data team with different responsibilities, of course, because one of the points that I raised, or also the other stakeholders in this decision raised, is that doing data is a creative job, and creativity actually thrives with the interaction with other people, with other data people. When you tend to distribute this effort, of course, you put the data scientist or data analyst or whatever closer to the business, but then they might contribute less because they are alone. They cannot actually brainstorm or interact with like-minded people with the same skill set, or the same goal in the organization. And so yes, we decided to go for a centralized approach, of course, with everyone with their own responsibilities, but just for having to enable the possibility of course, I'm working on my own project in a very small subset of the business, but I want to share ideas and having meaningful brainstorming with other data people that possibly are working on something else, but they might be curious, they might be interested in also having a say on what I'm doing. And I 100% agree with Julian when he says that we always say that data people have to be closer to the business, but actually I think that you have a real success when the business gets closer to the data. That is the biggest step to do. But when you have a business that is trusting you as a data team, you are already halfway or even more in the path to being a data-driven organization.
I think you can even add to that. So if you organize centrally, you can also work on a common understanding and common ways of working. Yeah? So it's not only in data science, it's actually in every discipline. You want to first build a common way of working, a common language, and then as soon as you have that ready and you can go out and, let's say, disperse the team into the organization, they still are able to connect well to each other because they have learned to talk in the same, same language. So it's definitely beneficial to have that team central in, and then it's always a dispute, of course. Should the business come to the data scientist, or should the data scientist go to the business? I think both of them can, of course, talk. So it's something that they probably need to figure out by experimenting, also looking at different ways in working together and see how effective it is, because one part of the organization might be somewhat more data savvy than others. The marketing, for example, is usually, let's say, a part of the organization where a lot of data is there, but maybe they're not that tech savvy. While operations are very techy, but their data not every organization is well organized. So it's difficult for them to have just one, let's say, approach. So maybe you have a hybrid approach depending on where in the organization you're doing the analysis, or for which part of the organization you're doing your data science project.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think. Julian, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, actually, I wanted. I'm seeing a question in the Q&A, which actually I think is interesting in this in this discussion, because Jacques asks, can you reflect on centralized versus distributed in terms of attracting talent? And actually, one of the reasons that we also choose for a centralized department was that a lot of people doing data analytics were a bit stuck in one topic. While actually we also believe that like having people working on different topics creates more creativity, and also, of course, generates more flexibility to put them on the topics where the urgency is the highest. But also, I believe, at least personally, that it's really nice to be able to work on different topics, right? So that you're not like just only working on say pricing, but you can also like look at campaigns, look at assortment, or look at other things. If I just talk about it from a retailer perspective, and have a bit more variety in the type of analysis you're doing. So in that way, and also then try to achieve like a bit of a higher level on what you're working on, instead of only being working on the nitty gritty things. So in that way, I think for talent, working in a centralized environment might be a bit more interesting.
Would you say, Julian, that for the less experienced data scientists, it might be, let's say, the best way to start at a company, and that for the more mature ones, to be part of the more decentralized teams?
Yeah, obviously, it's also nice to be close to the business in that case. And if you are really independent, then that's fine indeed. But if I look back at myself, then when I was just starting as a data scientist, I would really have liked to have more mature colleagues, which could drag me out the details sometimes and zoom out a bit. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and actually we're getting another question in the Q&A that really fits into the discussion, because we just talked about the connection between business and data science, which is a never-ending story. Obviously, we can fill another whole session with that, but I do want to touch upon it. And Arthur asked, like, are there like specific people, separate people to communicate to the business from the centralized team, like stewards or agents? Is it something that you've come across? Or are there other ways of finding each other?
I can start.
Do you want?
Okay. In this specific case, my experience is very biased, because being Housing Anywhere still a very young company, I can say that Housing Anywhere never existed without data. So the data-driven mindset has been there from the day zero. Our structure helped us in moving into this direction, because one of our VPs has been from day zero in charge. I mean, the VPs that is actually helping out in defining the strategy of the business was also in charge of heading the data science efforts at the very beginning. So we can say that we didn't need an agent to communicate with the management, but we already had, I mean, it was the other way around, was actually the management putting the effort in building up a data team. Actually, in the very early stages of Housing Anywhere, when the data team wasn't there, because I mean, it's not the very first team that has been created. The very first head of the department was our CEO. Then, of course, I mean, then the structure changed. But I mean, I don't know in more structured or more established companies where it might be that the management team in the past used to make decisions without a data team. But for us, I mean, it's very interesting to see how people that get into a company where the mentality, the data mentality is already established, are the first one that wants to have access to the data. It's very interesting to see how all our interns that might start, like business developers or people that are not directly connected to data, when they join the company, are in the very first week of onboarding, are already asking for access to reporting or dashboards, because they end up in a company that they can see from the day zero that the company is very data driven. So to wrap it up, I think that the more the company proves to be data driven, the less you need an agent, because are the people themselves, just to stress the point again, that are getting closer to data, because they already see the impact that doing data driven decision making has on the business. And so we don't need someone that goes and evangelize the other people about using data, because are the people themselves that are willing to do that.
Yeah, and if I can build upon that, Massimo, I actually agree with that. But on the other hand, you work at a scale up, right? Which I don't know, how long does your company exist?
It's pretty much 10 years, then has been through different phases. But I mean, in the current setting, I can say that we are talking about 5 years. So yes, I mean, of course, I agree. My opinion is biased on the topic. I mean, I think that that setting up a data culture in Albertine might be a little bit more complicated.
Well, I would say like, and then you had the chance to do, kind of draw it from scratch, right? And then, but I agree with that would be the ideal world. But still, also like in a corporate setting, there you sometimes see this more like translator roles a bit more often. But I actually do not really believe in this pure translation roles, in the sense that, I believe if you that ideally the people that do talk to the business directly also at least have some basic programming skills and can do some analysis just by themselves before they start talking to a technical team. And then people who can only like forming this bridge, so to say, I think also just create a lot of noise on the line. So I actually would encourage everyone to at least have some basic programming skills, and then it's also easier to talk to the really like technical team and already hand them like a really first draft technical solution which they can optimize, obviously. That's at least how I would see it.
I think I agree with you, which makes it maybe boring to continue this discussion, but I'm going to make a point here, because I don't believe in this translation rule. So I've been working for companies for 30 years, and data has been around ever since we have had computers. So that's nothing new there. I do think that it doesn't make sense to talk about techniques. So you don't discuss, okay, what type of model, what type of technique are you using? You're discussing what problem are you going to solve, and what are your expectations as a manager or as a user of the model about what the model is going to bring you. That is at least something that you as a user should be able to express, right? You want to have a certain outcome, and it is, let's say, up to the data scientist or the more technical people to find out, okay, what is that? How does this translate, between quotes, into what I need to do? And the other way around is, okay, if I have this excellent model, how I'm going to explain this to the end user, the person that is going to use the outcomes of this result. So there's no need for translation. It's really being interested in each other's role and talking about the problem that you need to solve instead of talking about techniques. So that's how I would look at it.
And do you think, John, did you see a change in that? Because I can imagine that what Massimo said, that people come in there and really curious to see the data, is also the maturity of where data is now. Like, it's become increasingly important in education, in everyone's job. But did you see a big change, or is it still a challenge?
Yeah, it's probably also, even though I see a lot of have seen a lot of companies, it probably will be biased. It has changed over time. When I started work, personal computers were just introduced. We've come a long way from there. But being able to understand if it's a report in Excel or the outcome of a model, that's not that different in my opinion. So it's really putting in the effort to understand the other side's, let's say, perspective, being able to express what you want from an analysis, and the other way around. If you provide the analysis, whether it's an advanced model or just a simple dashboard, that's also, let's say, just part of your job. And we can, of course, define some kind of a role and hide away, but it's similar to what you had years ago. There were these business relationship managers in organizations that connected IT people to business people. And we all know the story of that. That wasn't very successful as well. It's all about maybe investing some additional time to understand from a data science perspective what's happening in business, which will, I guess, let's say, also improve, let's say, the quality of your job. And the other way around, businesses need to become more savvy, need to be educated a little bit, not the technical side, but what you can do with data science. And then if you have put in that effort, there's no need for some intermediate role.
Yeah, I recognize that. And I think people from the audience are recognizing that. We're getting a message from Shilta. Hi, Shilta. And she's saying that it's a responsibility of all team members to find that translation process from both the data scientist and the business. So she
Totally agree. Yeah.
has built a lot of teams, so she agrees with that as well. And we have another question from the audience. Any recommendations for creating a high performance data science team? Well, that's a big one, I think.
Hire good people.
Done.
Yeah.
What do you look for in building a team? What are
Diversity? That's what I really look for. It doesn't make sense to have super specialists solely. Yeah. So it definitely needs to be different people, and it's not. To me, it's not very conditioned on whether it's a data science teams or not. It's really about how to build a team. But of course, you have to have the right technical skills in there, and it should be matched with the challenges that you're up against. But it should be a diverse team, because I believe diversity is really key in excellence performance. The other thing is that it should be well connected to the part in the organization that you work for. So yeah, maybe it's good to open this up also to Julian, because he has been part of several parts of corporate organizations. Maybe he could comment on how does this work in from his perspective, from the corporate perspective.
Yeah, thanks, John. But actually, I believe that it's quite common for all the teams in the sense that besides diversity, which you were already mentioning, also putting trust in the people is really important. But also a thin line, because you want to give the people the most trust as possible, but also should be careful while still meeting the quality standards and not disappointing your stakeholders. So that is one part, and on the other part, I also believe that the way of working and really simple planning could also make a hell lot of difference how people perform. Sometimes they just need a little bit of help with giving people a bit of structure, how to plan their work, and from there on, also making more clear like what they should focus on and where they should put their priorities, instead of being dragged in all these small ad hoc questions, which probably every data team always gets. So yeah, but I don't see a lot of difference between the corporate or startup scene there. But maybe Massimo, you feel different about it?
No, I mean I agree with the big points. That is not trying to fill positions and having roles that are too vertical, but trying to prioritize people that can do cover different roles at the same time. I mean, currently, I would say a lie if I say that the business analysts or the data analysts in my company, they're not taking care of data engineering at all, or the data scientists can just focus on training models and don't have to have a look at how the whole deployment will work, I mean, on the engineering part. So yes, I mean, at least at the very early stages, because I mean, then if you look at open positions in way bigger tech companies, they're very specific and very small in scope, at least from the job description. But at the beginning, I mean, to get traction is crucial to have people that can have a very diverse skill set with respect to our skills, that can do different stuff at the same time. As John was saying, is very important that they I mean, from my experience, for the very first positions to fill in a team, is important to start from a computer engineering background, at least at the beginning. Of course, I mean, with a data flavor, with a major in data somewhere in their career, but I mean, for me, it's been crucial to fill the very first position with a solid engineering background. And then while growing, might be that you start to have very more specific use cases and might be needed to have some specific skill sets, because I mean, when the project starts to grow, it's not feasible, even if the team is centralized. I mean, some roles are more specific, and so you might need someone that has, I don't know, that very specific statistical background in a topic that might be useful, like forecasting. I mean, not everyone can do forecasting, for example, at a certain level. But yes, I mean, being flexible, not focus too much on very specific skill sets, because in the end, I mean, it's not commutative. It's not that if you add 3 people with a very small skill set, you will have the same performances of less people with a more broad skill set. And yes, I mean, I agree also on the structure. Also, even if our team now is smaller, of course, than the Julian's team or John, I guess it's important for data to give a structure from the very first stages of the team, because data is creative and can tend to be quite a mess while a project is executed, because the complexity might explode, the direction you can take in the exploration might explode. So it's important to define metrics, to define success, to define a structure, so people can follow with their own creativity, of course, because it's very important to trust and empower people from the very beginning, but with a structure. I think that it's also important.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you're raising, I think, because I think that's a fine line between, and it's something you mentioned before, Julian, as well, between giving structure and also creating ownership. I can imagine that that's quite a challenge sometimes. Did you want to add on that, John, or did you have another point you want to make?
Yeah, so high performance teams, they don't perform in, let's say, isolation. So they are part of a bigger environment. So a high performance team is not only about the configuration of the team and how you manage the team itself. It's also about the surroundings in which they operate. So being recognized for a special role, being recognized for the achievements you make, maybe it's already been said, but being empowered by, let's say, the sponsors or the senior management, adoption of the things that you've created by the organization itself. These are also, let's say, factors that will influence, let's say, the impact of the data science team. So,
and as a data science manager, say you're managing a team, how do you make sure that they get this recognition, that they
so that implies that there should be, you should be well connected to the decision makers within an organization, or at least with your indirect clients within an organization. So that's one of the things that should be taken care of. That you work on the questions that are really important for an organization. So Massimo already mentioned it in his comments before. Start simple to make sure that you achieve something that is noteworthy, that is something that is recognized, and then gradually build upon that. So that is something that can be done, but it's being able to surprise again. So being able to increase your performance is also about working on the key topics that are important for the organization itself. Otherwise, you might still have, let's say, a very well-trained and a very well-skilled team, but it is not working on the topics that are really relevant. I've seen some organizations really invest in acquiring a lot of talent. Well-trained people from all kinds, especially in the beginning of data science. That's something that happened. PhD students, people from physics who were hired by huge consulting agencies to build a high-performing, well-trained team. And a year after, already these people started to leave because they were not engaged, because they were not working on the topics they liked the most, and they were not delivering any value to the organization that they were working for. So that's I think still true. Maybe not now for data science anymore, but for AI, for example, which is of course the new trend that we're now seeing.
Yeah, I think it is still. I think it's a recognizable problem for anyone in this field, I would say. Massimo, Julian, anything you want to add before I move on to?
No, I mean, because has been mentioned artificial intelligence, that is very true that that you can hire a lot of talent straight out of university, because I mean, in artificial intelligence, machine learning, where there isn't actually a track record of history of decades of success, you can attract very good talent if you hire them straight out of university or PhDs. It's very important from a management perspective to keep them engaged and to manage expectations, because as I was saying, in our company, at least, we are doing real artificial intelligence and real machine learning. But I mean, it's not a corporate secret to tell that we are not writing papers, we are not moving the state of the art in artificial intelligence. We are using techniques that are well recognized in the field, and we are applying them to our business. So it's very important, while managing talents in this field, to be honest, also during the interviewing process, to also say and clarify that in the business, in the companies, it's very hard to move state of the art to doing artificial intelligence research, and you have to keep them engaged anyway. So I think that is really a challenge in this field, at least from my experience, to keep data scientists, the big talents, the good talents in this field, keep them engaged while working for multiple years and several projects in a company. Retaining data scientists is a challenge. To me, will be the biggest challenge in the job market, probably. I mean, for the past 2 years and the next 10, probably, because it's very easy for data scientists, at least from my experience, to get bored about projects, and it's a challenge to keep them engaged.
Is it a data science problem or a millennium problem?
I mean, from my experience, it's related to all the engineering and tech related jobs. I mean, it's not a news that also engineers in general have a very low retention score in companies. I think that it's a millennium problem that is related to engineering in general. And for data science, that also has this very strong creative part. I think that might be even worse, but there isn't huge literature yet on this field. So I mean, it's still under development.
What I'm also curious to hear from you, Massimo and John, in this about this topic is like, how much do you think actually still need data scientists in the future? Because of course, for really specific use cases, it's good to have people that can develop certain models, and obviously we also have those people. Because we have some highly specified specialized use cases, but also in many cases you can either rely on APIs from big providers, or use open source packages, which might also really accelerate what you're doing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, can start. Yes, I mean, I see the problem. I honestly believe that even if it's the field that is currently paying my rent, I think that we are into quite a bubble. And I'm not sure that, now there is a lot of demand for data scientists. I'm not sure that will be the same in 5 to 10 years. Because I agree with you, there is a lot of open source around, a lot of APIs that you can use, a lot of plug and play tools that you can use from the big cloud providers, for example. So they tend to eliminate all the complexity or the need for machine learning engineers. But I still believe that it's important to actually use those tools effectively. You still need people that knows what is going on behind the scenes. So it's very theoretical to say that a person that is not specifically trained on data science can pick up these APIs, can pick up these tools, and successfully deploy them. So I mean, I agree with you that very likely in 5 years we will not still talk about data science as the next big thing, because about very specific or complex use cases. But I still think that also for leveraging these tools, you will need people that are specifically trained on data science and they know what they're doing. So for sure, less job, probably not as highly paid as now, but I don't see the data science field disappear or to explode completely in the near future. Because I mean, whatever the market is offering, you still need people that are trained. Otherwise, I mean, you will notice the difference if you have people that are not trained on the specific skill set using these tools.
Yeah, so I think similarly, although I think that the people that now, let's say, call themselves data scientists, and I specifically, let's say, take this wording, that a lot what they do or what is happening in practice is not really data science. So we just, let's say, label it as data science. So I don't think that the core demand for data science is really, let's say, using techniques from machine learning and other types of techniques to really extract insights from data and do something useful with it is something that is going to remain, even though some of the somewhat simpler, let's say, work will be automated. But still, and I agree with Massimo there, you need to understand how these techniques work. And I've seen several organizations invest in this automated, let's say, machine learning, and these projects simply fail. Because the end user is not educated well enough to understand what is happening behind, let's say, the scenes, don't know let's say the downsides of the techniques that are chosen, or it's completely hidden away. And I feel that if you use this type of automation without the knowledge of what are the limitations, you can end up with very, let's say, poor performing projects. And we only have to go back a couple of years ago, where the financial markets were hit by similar, let's say, approaches, blind faith in the models that were created to predict what future default rates would be. And as a consequence, we are still paying the price for that. So I really think that in crucial applications, and of course, if you're forecasting or predicting the churn rate of your customer base, well, there's not much harm in that, unless you're a company like Netflix, for which it's really important. But if you, let's say, talk about really core applications, then you really need the data scientist and the data science capabilities to be able to provide, let's say, the best possible model that you can think of. And you cannot hide that away by applying off-the-shelf applications, because simply they're not created for that. Right? The difference between getting value from these automated solutions and really getting value is about the details, because the details matter if you really want to make a difference. And that's where I think the core skill of the data scientist comes into place.
Does that answer your question, Julian?
Yeah, I think so. I agree. I agree with the points being made. I also think that I think it depends on the application, and also what we see on our side is, as I said before, we have some highly specialized use cases which are really company specific, and there you can definitely not rely on what's out there. But for maybe a proof of concept, it also depends on the phase of your project. For a proof of concept phase, it might be really useful to just start working with an API on image recognition, for example, and just see if it kind of gets the results you were expecting, and if so, you can always train a new model from scratch.
Did you see the latest, let's say, conversation on Twitter on this? So how image recognition is, fortunately we're all Caucasian, but it could be that if I would have been let's say, a black person, that my silhouette would not have been recognized by, let's say, this off-the-shelf facial recognition software, and you wouldn't be able to see me. So that's already a very simple thing, in which, let's say, there's an enormous downside in using these types of techniques, simply because they're not well enough, let's say, created to work in all kinds of situations.
On another note, I mean, I wanted to add just to, it's mainly a comment on what John was saying, and I agree. Onboarding a data scientist is complicated, because in the very first month, it's not really a matter of knowing the techniques or knowing the algorithms or knowing the formulas that are used to maximize the output of a model, but it's really knowing the data architecture, the schema of the tables, how the data are stored in a company. And even if the big companies or big corporates are outsourcing or are offering more than outsourcing APIs or open source packages for training and building the model, I think that the very first steps of every data science project will always be collecting data, cleaning data, and preparing them to be fed to a model. And this knowledge is so company specific that whatever will happen in the next decade to make artificial intelligence, machine learning data, call it as you wish, more accessible, you will always need these first steps to be conducted by specialists that are inside a company. Then you can call them data scientists, you can call them data engineers, you can call them data cleaners, but this knowledge will always be inside a company, because again, I mean, to wrap it up, onboarding a data scientist is very complicated and it's a very long process, and takes a lot of months to become an expert and to become a go-to person for a specific part of the data architecture. I mean, I'm not completely onboarded on the Housing Anywhere data architecture after more than 2 years. And it's a quite small company, and it's not a huge data architecture. So, I mean, imagine how complicated it will be for a bigger company. This knowledge has to be in-house, whatever will happen.
I totally agree with that. So I also, let's say, have a story to tell. So I was working for a telecom company in the Netherlands, and they hired all kinds of very experienced data scientists. And these data scientists were kind of, let's say, being little princes. So they didn't, let's say, bother with getting, let's say, to know where this data was coming from. And as a result, their models didn't provide any insights. And the people that hired them were really angry with them. because they didn't tell them anything new, even though they were paying them 150 euros per hour, let's say. So this type of behavior is not something that does the profession a lot of, let's say, doesn't give them a lot of kudos. So I like, let's say, the way in which you just expressed that every data science project starts with data. And maybe we should start calling them data magicians, the people that really, let's say, do the plumbing of these types of projects. Because if you do this right, then there is the basis for a real successful application, and therefore also the success of your team.
Yeah, I don't know if I think this also really depends of different. This might be different per company because at least so far on our side, a lot of money had been invested in in this data cleaning process, and therefore so far me and my team didn't have to bother too much about it. Of course, a little bit we need to grab the data together, put it in a structured way which is works for us, so to say, for my team. But still, we don't need to be involved in too much data cleaning and ETL processes. But that's because we already have quite some maturity there, and I really like big teams being involved with that. And so far, I didn't encounter a lot of data issues, and actually once you have the data in well-structured tables, you can doing the analysis is actually just easy, I would say.
It hides away, let's say, the data, how the process, how the data is gathered. So if the data is there, you assume that you work with the bonus card, let's say, data, that the same person is using the same card, right? I heard some figures, but maybe that's a bit, let's say, awkward to say, but about 10% of the people share their card. So you don't actually know if you're talking about the same person or the same family. How do you know, let's say, how do you take that into account when you start using the data and you don't know that in the cleaning process that hasn't been, let's say, changed or processed or
of course, that is an issue, and you should know the nature of the data, so to say. In our cleaning process, obviously, unused cards, which are cards being used like 100 times a day, are not being taken into account. And also, we kind of control for that by, I believe you can still then use the data to identify trends, but you cannot rely too much on it as being like the absolute number, so to say, due to these kind of biases. And on the other hand, by just being a bit pragmatic, having this data is better than having nothing. So we at least we need to make 100% of the decisions with 50% of the information, so to say. But it's at least better than nothing.
You sound like Rutte.
Thank you.
I think Shield is offering an interesting point about this in the question. She's asking, will proper data management and data governance resolve this issue of the necessity to data cleanse, or will it always be a problem? What do you think?
It has been a problem for 30 years and it will continue to be a problem. That's my take.
All right, that's clear.
I believe the person that solves this can make a lot of money. Let me put it like that.
All right. So I want to zoom out a little bit more, and I actually want to talk about the title of this webinar. We've touched upon it before, which is guaranteeing success. I think we've touched upon a lot of points that can, define whether something works or not. But especially as a manager, you're the one who is often responsible. How do you, if you want to start with data in an organization, how do you guarantee success?
I can start.
Yes.
It's hard to guaranteeing success itself, because data is a field where for a lot of different reasons, that might be data quality, that might be, I don't know, that a very specific task that the state of the art still didn't solve, or it's a quite pathological case. It's hard to guarantee success because you can execute perfectly. But might be that in the end you will, you can know that the specific problem cannot be solved at the time being with data, but you cannot promise with all your life, investing all your life savings in betting, okay, this project can be solved with data in this company. So, I mean, it's really a matter of a trade-off of managing expectations, being a good communicator, especially with people that are not well educated on the topic and on the field itself. So more than guaranteeing success is really managing expectations and defining what a success would mean in a specific project. Because of course, I mean, it's easy to say that the success is a model that in production will increase the revenue of 100%. But in data, I mean, it's very important. I want to stress that it's really a matter of managing expectations and be clear with the stakeholders. And you can promise the best execution possible. And you have to prove, of course, that you are doing the best possible with a specific data set. I mean, you can have as a result of an analysis that we tried this specific project didn't succeed because of this, and so be actionable in telling, okay, if we fix this problem in 1 year, because also with data, the problem is that if you discover that something is missing or something was broken, you need a lot of time to collect the data that you would need to make it a success. So to wrap it up, I mean, I would rephrase the whole question more as more than guaranteeing success, managing expectations and being a good communicator about what a success will mean in a specific project. It's one of the most complicated stuff while managing data teams in general.
Yeah, if I can build further upon that, I actually maybe sounds a bit boring, but also agree. Like I was thinking, you can guarantee success actually by not guaranteeing success, because that's often where it goes wrong. That people really have the belief that if you just have a lot of data, that would lead to a lot of business value. But to touch upon a little bit more how I would see that in practice is that, and I think that those are also common practices we kind of took from the software industry, is to just iterate a lot. And with that, I mean, how I would usually see this process more on a business application side is that suppose you first go to your business stakeholder, you obviously try to have some first data insights at first, so you at least can have a good conversation to start with, then try to really understand the problem, and then doing analysis, just small analysis that brings you closer to the answer, instead of just working for weeks on a really big thing that one day, which will actually never be finished then. So that's that's why I believe like iterating, like having like weekly or bi-weekly meetings with your business stakeholders, continuously getting feedback, and trying to figure out like, hey, does it make sense, and can we actually take actions upon these insights before just continuing.
But when you start in an organization with data science, I mean, you do need to sell it, right? Especially when it's new for organizations. Don't they want some sort of guarantee from you, in your experience?
Yes, but how I see it is that you have different phases for your different data projects, and then in the first initial phase, you try to like at least make clear like, okay, what would be the business value that could be gained from this data project. If before you as a whole organization would just like invest a lot of money in data analytics, I would suggest first start setting up a few pilot projects to see like, okay, what could work here, and what is the potential value, and then you could think of, okay, what kind of talent and structure we might need to form that, because also within data analytics there's a lot of different kind of roles and different kind of expertise you could add to your team.
To build upon that, I think it's important to define success. So you can, of course, think of all kinds of cases that you could do, and that you could, let's say, use data or analytics for to let's say, fulfill the promise of such a case. But what's important before you even start looking at data is to have a clear description and a clear understanding of what really the problem is that you're trying to solve. As it could be that, as Massimo indicated, that you have a problem in your organization that they believe data is an answer, but it isn't. And you should be clear about that. That's also something that we said at the beginning as one of our key lessons, is to make no promises that you can't keep. But if you, let's say, then have a good understanding of the problem and there is data that you can use, it's important before you even start thinking about a model is to define what is success. So is it success that you have a model that can provide a prediction, or is it a model that can provide a prediction with a certain accuracy? And that is something that you need to, this is the type of data science questions that you would like to address with your client, either externally or internally. Your client does, what does the client, how does the value for the client translate into the conditions that you have to set for the type of model that you're creating? Having a model that provides a prediction with a 50% accuracy, flipping a coin, doesn't probably, even though it could be, let's say that's the best you can do. If you know beforehand that a 90% accuracy is required, you also know, let's say, that you cannot get there, or in the process that you see that you can't get there. And that's also then a reason for going back to your client and being clear about what they can expect and what not. So that is the type of thing I think is important, being a good communicator, but also being clear about the expectations on both sides, and have quantitative agreements on what the outcome should be. And if you're able to do that, then you can, well, not guarantee, but come closer to success than just moving along and, let's say, gradually growing to something that will never end, as Julian said.
Yeah, I wanted to add, just to wrap it up, because I think that we're almost done, is that one of the very first challenges for a new data team is to define the metrics and the processes to define success itself. Because as John was saying about accuracy in a model, but I mean, accuracy is a very data science specific metric, or whatever metric you want to use. And then this metric has to be translated to a business metric, because very unlikely the accuracy of a model itself will be a business metric that will drive revenue or time that people spend on a task. So I think that for how fun it sounds, the very first challenges of a data team are defining KPIs and metrics. Then the data team itself will optimize and define its own success while optimizing the metrics, doing models or simpler things. But yes, I mean, the definition of success and deciding what success is one of the things to agree with the stakeholders, and it's one of the very first things that a data team has to do itself as a project. Because I mean, very likely if a data team doesn't exist, probably in the business, apart from revenue or number of bookings in our case or whatever, there aren't established KPIs to optimize. So it's the data teams that has to provide them.
All right, thank you very much. We are nearing the end of this session, so any last questions, please ask them now. We have one actually from Oren. He asked before, like, are there lessons to take from software development into data science? And I think Julian already answered that a little bit, that there are, for example, the iteration process. But if you guys have other ideas, they're welcome. And he's also asking, which is a bit more into detail, but I guess you can shortly get into it, is do you believe in creating a data lake and organizing all your data centralized? We talked about centralized versus decentralized already, but in terms of collecting your data, or do you think everyone should just collect data from whatever sources they can get their hands on? I see John, like his ears bleeding, but yeah, Julian, go.
No, a good question. Maybe first to really shortly touch upon the software part, like learnings we could take from the software world. There, I think, but Massimo probably knows more about this than I do. We still have a lot to learn regarding this topic. One problem with data science is obviously that you not only have code, you need to like version control, but also your data, which also leads to your eventual parameters. But to answer this last question, personally, I would really go for a hybrid solution here. So sometimes you see companies, you hear that companies say like, oh, we really would like to have a big data lake and just put all our data in there, and then the value will come by itself. Well, actually, that's a really time-consuming and like money-draining project. which doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of value, as we just said, because you first need to know, as we all agreed upon, what is the questions we're trying to answer, what we're actually trying to achieve here, and maybe build a few use cases first. On the other hand, if you have a little bit of maturity or already know, or you have a lot of peers in your industry which are a bit more mature, you do know like which data you definitely want to have. So, for example, as a retailer, your transaction data is like the most obvious one, or your your article database or your store database. You really want to have this information for a lot of use cases. So that it makes sense, and that's actually also how we operate. Like to have like these really common data sets in a centralized data lake. But then for specific use cases, yeah, you can obviously also like gather your own data, upload it manually, and add it to the existing data, and then try to build upon that before just like fully integrating it into an ETL process and making it really complex.
Yep. I mean, then I will reply also on the software engineering best practices, but about the data lake, yes, I mean, I think that the source of truth should be centralized, at least the source of truth that the data analysts or data scientists are using. That this doesn't mean that the data that you can find there cannot come from different data sources, can come from multiple data sources, but data scientists, data analysts shouldn't access to the data sourcing themselves. It's better to have a single point of truth, and in this case it's the data lake or the data warehouse. I mean, it's probably not the right moment to start discussing the differences, but yes, I mean, the data source will be centralized. Then starts a lot of discussions about ETL processes, how to integrate different data sources in a single one. But I mean, it's also for how the business is moving. I think that the big step is going for a data warehouse or a data lake and centralizing all our different data sources. From software engineering, just to be quick, as Julian was saying, the most important learning is to version control everything. Code, data, even if version controlling data is quite a complicated topic. Models, all your infrastructure theoretically should be serialized, because it's important when a team grows to have logs, or to have an history of what has been done on the data, on the infrastructure, on the project. Version control everything using Git. Then I mean, you can be creative as well on how to use it, because I mean, doesn't still exist a single way to do it. But yes, I mean, from software engineering, definitely an attention to quality, to testing, and to version control everything you can.
One closing remark then. I really believe that you should be very careful with what you do and where you get your data, especially if the applications that you build upon, so you can't, let's say, have somebody coming up with some data and then putting into a model that is becoming a part of your decision making. So you really have to be very strict in that. So I worked for several companies. One was an oil company, and you can imagine that the oil price is something that drives their business. They had something like 33 different definitions of oil price. Can you imagine what happens if the wrong oil price runs into a business case? At a bank, a similar thing. In this case, interest rates, yield curves, that different. The same yield curves were different for different types of products, which is very curious if you want to manage your risk within a bank. So I really believe the source of the truth, as you put it, Massimo, should be somewhere central. And of course, there's ways to experiment. And if it's useful, then you should also start about thinking about getting in that data in a structured way, so that you know the source and that it's trustworthy. Otherwise, you're building a model on quicksand. So that's, I think, the closing remark, because we're way past our time.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for answering this last question while we pass our time indeed a little bit. I want to thank everyone for being here, and thank you, Julian, Massimo, and John, for enlightening us with all your insights. I think it was a very valuable discussion, a lot of takeaways for data managers or aspiring data managers. So thanks for being here. For the audience here, next week there will be a workshop on solving common problems for data science manager. It's a design thinking workshop. If you're interested in this, please let us know so we can sign you up. And thanks again, everyone, for being here, and hope to see you next time. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Bye. Thank you.